I'm going to put my family. They're at Disney, so hopefully they come back safe and sound.
And they left you?
Why are you not?
I got a vacation.
Oh, yeah?
This is his Christmas present.
This is my Christmas present.
Oh, away from them?
Away from them. Away from seeing my money being spent on things I don't want.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
how you doing, man?
Hey.
Hey, you can take Joanna's family off there.
Joanna's family?
Yeah.
You do.
Everybody's recovered. Very bottom. There you go.
Anyone else?
Finals are over, aren't they?
Finals, are they over? We have
Yes.
college students. They are over. I was just told by the college.
The right side. Black.
You do. Anyone else? Any other updates? Anything else? It's easier on me. Any updates? I think we'll keep Jim Shoemaker up on there just because it's still recent. Shoemaker families, there's still mourning the loss of George. Devin Kaiser, he looks like he's doing better, right?
Yeah, I think he's going to have like a long recovery, but I don't think
I'm going to put
normal standard recovery.
our recent baptisms. We've had 2 in the past 2 weeks.
Yep. We've got Joe Hansen on there too. But Jody Parker.
And Mike Neal's boy.
Yeah.
Anything else need to be added? Anything else need to be taken off?
Mary's great uncle. It was Larry and Melinda, aunt and uncle. They both had COVID. They were on the ventilators, but they both just came off, and they're doing better. So Mary had put that on Deerfoot disciples, but they're doing. They seem to be really coming through. So it's been an answer to prayer. So they're not completely through the woods, but it's huge.
Okie dokie. Anything else? Could I get David? Could I get you Liz an opening prayer?
Yep. Let's pray. Dear God and Father in heaven, we're grateful for your love for us, your care for us, constant watching over us, Father, and care of our fellow Christians. Father, we pray that we can give some of that care to others as they're hurting this time, as they're on the prayer list. Please be with them as we also try to care for them. Father, we pray that you will
Be with us during our study.
bless this study, help us to become better servants of you through reading the study of the brothers. Pray all this through your Son's name.
Okie dokie. So let's just go ahead. Let's start immediately in Romans. If someone could read, let's do the. It's gonna be a big chunk. I'll go ahead. I'll take it. Well, I was gonna say let's look at the first 15 verses. Let's just go ahead because I want to get through one. There's a lot of material in the first 2 to 3 chapters, so we won't be able to cover all of it. So,
Yeah.
but
Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets and the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, who was descended from David according to the flesh, and was declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness, by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord, through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith for the sake of his name, among all the nations, including you who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. To all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I want you to know, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I'm under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to wise and the foolish. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome.
So there's a lot going on here. The first kind of section I want to talk about, several in here, but it was, let me see, where was it? It's where he's making the reference. He's talking to the Jews, the Greeks, and he also includes the barbarians. So why is that significant around this time period to include the barbarians? Just general historical knowledge. Why is it?
I'm sure there was some barbarian wars going on in Rome between the barbarians this time.
Precisely. So Paul here is kind of opening up. It's, the Gentiles, as we've been looking at, we've always just looked at it as like the Romans and the Greeks, but it's also, Gentiles are the whole outside Jewish body.
Mm-hmm.
And so right here, Paul keeps adding on to the messages expanding to the outward. So that's something.
So the Romans, we always say they conquered the known pearl, but there were some that they did not conquer, like the Picts in Scotland. That
Yeah, they didn't conquer. They did of Anglo area.
Yeah. So what they did was they put Hadrian's Wall up. Of course, that's later on, than this time frame. But instead of conquering them, they just said those were barbarians, and that's why they called it Scotland. Scotia means land of darkness. So it's just don't go there.
But yeah, I kind of thought that was a very interesting thing, just because usually we haven't. I don't see a reference until like Romans, where he adds and includes the barbarians. Right. So it kind of also gives you this concept of maybe one of the Jewish people within Rome also being them as well, because they may have. We know that there was some aligned with Herodian style, so they probably also viewed barbarians as, we need to stay away from them.
I think it's fitting too to mention that the Romans didn't want to go there, literally putting up the walls, but Jesus breaks down those walls of hostility, and the tradition is that Andrew went to Scotland, and that's why they have the St. Andrew's cross, is that blue flag with the white X. That's St. Andrew's cross. So, I think there's a great example here of Jesus reaches barbarians, Romans put up a wall.
But going earlier now, I want to go kind of back to verse 3. I'm kind of going scatterbrain. It's been a fun week, so sorry. But verse 3, there's a very interesting part. It says, it talks about the Son of Christ, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh. It's very important that we look at this, because Jesus, as we see both in Matthew 1:1 and Matthew 1:21-23, he has two sides. He has the human side and the divine side. And I love how Paul kind of pulls this out for us right here. He's talking about how, Christ is the Son of God, but he's also from the seed from a man, in a sense. And so when we contrast verses 3 and 4 between the human side and the divine side, the nature of Christ, as to his human nature, he was the Son. So it kind of goes to like what Richard was saying in his sermon earlier. He had disciples who saw him as a man die. That lingering lack of faith. And that's what Romans is. Romans is a book of faith, as we'll see. It's going to be as one of its centerpieces, is faith. And so the lack of faith in seeing Christ, the Messiah, die caused many of the people who were his disciples, many of the people who were fed at the 5,000 who saw, to just walk. And that is something that we see common even today. And so that's something I just want us to bring out. Joseph, as even mentioned earlier this morning, Joseph was not the father of Jesus, but he treated him like one. That's kind of like how we should treat our brothers. They're not our actual brothers, but we should treat them. And Paul in this introduction does that very well. You know, we saw in Philemon 2 when he's talking to Philemon, and talking of Onesimus and bragging about him, how he treats them as he would himself, as his brother. So I think that's a very powerful thing. Before we move on, I also want to ask, where are we? So we just finished Acts. Where are we right now in that journey of Acts in Romans?
Kind of picking up where Acts left off.
Kinda. So I'm using the Bible timeline from the Bible Hub, and so they have the timeline of it being written in 57 AD. So this is, he just finished writing to the Corinthians, the Galatians, the Macedonians, and so it's before he's pulled up to Festus. It's before that area. So he's writing right now before he's even gone to Rome. And that's something that we need to kind of make sure we understand. When he's writing to the Romans, he's not in Rome yet. He is in that 2 to 3 year period waiting to be put on trial. He's in that 2 to 3 year period before, you know, they send him to Rome, before even the ship crashes in it. So that's something that when we need to take in mind when he's writing this later, because he's in prison.
Let's explain verse 11. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you.
Mm-hmm. That's a powerful thing to understand, because, you know, as we were talking about in Acts, just to highlight, you know, we thought, did Paul even know how he was going to get the wrong? All we know was in Acts that Christ, during the trial before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, that Christ said, you're going to Rome, and that's it. He didn't know how he was going to get there. He didn't know what it was going to take. And so this is a glimpse, an internal glimpse of what Paul might have been Paul might have been thinking during that time. And I love how he's talking about the faith. And it's going to be really strong in this moment for Paul. So let's continue forward. Anyone else have anything to add before we move forward?
It's crazy, you know, verse 8 says, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. But in verse 11, verse 11, it says, and he wants to impart you a spiritual gift so that you may be established. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think an apostle, correct me if I'm wrong, an apostle, I don't think ever come to that church because they don't have the spiritual gifts, but their faith is still touted.
That's what we were talking about in the introduction to
world already.
No apostle, they don't. There's really no understanding, like real reference of how it was started. Peter never went there. The apostles went there. He just started from the ear, which is very powerful.
Well, when you think about it, making disciples of all the nations. That's all the nations. There would have been Romans that became Christians that took it.
It goes to, I believe it's Acts 8, but with Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. He wasn't an apostle, he was a disciple, and he converted the eunuch. And
traditionally, he took it to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
You know, the church was in Jerusalem, but then it was scattered. So I'm sure people who came from Rome to Jerusalem for Passover stayed there, but then they went back to Rome. That's a pretty long journey.
So let's continue.
Listen, in Acts 2:10, that on the day of Pentecost, those from Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome.
Yes.
So there could have been the 3,000. Of the 3,000, you had Rome, Romans that became Christians and stayed there, and then during the like you said, Acts 8, the dispersion, where do they go? Rome.
That's the word I was thinking,
Dispensation.
Dispersion.
So let's continue going forward. Can someone we'll get 16 through, let's go 16 through 23 real fast. We want to get those? One of the Davids.
What? Okay. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. That 323, right?
Yeah. So I like, when we look at this last part, it's talking about from creation. So looking at starting at verse 20, Paul's basically given like this very, very slim, what's the word? Can't think of it. It's basically like a synopsis or like a cliff notes of what happened in Genesis. So look at it. You know, he's saying from the creation, the attributes. You know, I think that's beautiful. I'm not going to read all of it, but there is AP Bible. Always endorse. Get the AP Bible. It's a really good study Bible.
That's what I read from.
Yeah, it talks about how, I'll just read the first part. The idea of, referencing verse 20, the idea often is presented that the creation of the universe is not scientific because a supernatural creator cannot be tested using present scientific instruments and procedures. When prominent atheists and outspoken opponent of creation have expressed precisely such statements, the ultimate statement of creationism that present universe came about as the result of the action of a divine creator is thus outside the abilities of science to test. I want to stop there. That is,
It didn't happen. We can't.
this is just as equal as, this is equivalent for us also to talk about the Big Bang.
Right. No one can test that.
No one can test the
It
Big
never
Bang.
happened in nature.
And they talk, and this is the argument I always like to hear from them is, well, we can look at the radio waves, the dead waves, you know, the static on the TVs, those are dead waves from the beginning and everything. That does not disprove the creationist idea.
Right.
We don't know how the universe works. God did not simply tell Moses mathematics. He did not tell him how to do calculus. He did not tell him physics. He told the people of the Old Testament what they needed to know, which was the law to be with God.
We could fully understand God as well. He wouldn't really be God.
Yeah.
We could just put him in a box and figure them all out, and you know.
I had a conversation with one of my friends here in the congregation, and we were talking about, we were having this just general discussion about the knowledge. So, what would have happened if Adam didn't eat of the fruit, Eve did? We just like to play around with that conversation. But in the end, we kind of came to a somewhat conclusion of knowledge. God was trying to cultivate the knowledge in them.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have known. We were his keepers for a purpose, and we would have gained the knowledge on his terms. But once we took that knowledge from him, from our terms, that is when we were separated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's funny how when you read verse 20 to the end, it is the exact same argument that the scientific community says that you can't use to prove creationism, that you can look at them and say, what about this dark matter? What about this dark matter? What about, you can't prove this as well. The argument is equally faulty.
But I think too, true science, in order for a theory to be established, a hypothesis has to be true. A testable explanation for something observed.
Mhm.
So true science can't establish the origin of this world, this universe, because nobody was there to observe it.
Mhm.
And so it cannot be a theory of evolution because no one observed it.
Mhm.
Because the hypothesis has not been established. Still hasn't been.
I wonder.
But then that has bypassed theory, it's gone on to fact. Well, fact comes from that theory being established. Like, I can let go of a pen in my hand and it's not going to go up, it's going to go down. That's That's a hypothesis if I said it was going to go down, and when it does, I observe that that's true, therefore it's a theory of gravity. You know, so anyway, science is true, but
That's
what
why-
is being touted as science isn't even science.
That's why we have I did a class a few years ago back when I was first teaching. You have the laws of science versus the theories, and the laws of science have been proven so much so that you cannot disprove them.
Right.
And they were initially started to disprove something in the beginning, and that's why they became laws most of the time.
Right.
So theories, you know, I won't want to spend the whole class on this, but you can. It's a rabbit hole discussion. I just want to end on this kind of part before we move forward onto the other topics in Romans. Because again, it's about faith. It's about faith. So you get that faith and believe into what that scientific stuff is. Now I say that because we always hear the missing link for changing a man. And then I also hear, oh, well, there was dogs came from wolves, they were, domesticated, everything. There's got to be a transitional species in that sense. The question I have is, if there's a missing link for man, was the missing link between each species, the cat, the feline tree, the canine tree? To my knowledge, if I'm wrong, you can send it to me, but to my knowledge, I'm not seeing the missing link between any species jumping.
No.
We focus so much on the species of man, but you would have to take that to every species.
Cat Dog was on Nickelodeon, that's it.
That's all. The cat dog is the best show. Where's Alex? Here is it. Oh, you got that cat dog.
You got
No, that was Evan. Evan got it at the
Yeah,
end.
we got that.
But I also, moving forward towards the end, it also talks about, what happened to man. So when we look forward, they did not glorify God. They, as we see in verse 1, they didn't glorify Him. They became futile in their thoughts. They became foolish. They darkened their hearts. They essentially were talking about how they worship animism, in a sense. We look at it. And professing to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like a corruptible man, and birds and four-legged foot, and animals and creeping things. So we're seeing Paul here, he's giving the synopsis of God created this, and it was the folly of man that we started worshiping. We became corruptible, and we built the idols that were man-like, we built the idols that were animal-like, or a hybrid. If you look at the Greek culture, there's always like a mixture of an animal, human creature, human hybrid. But we did that. And that's a powerful thing when you realize it's he's basically in this one little bit, it's a very powerful passage. Because it looks like he's glossing over it, but there's a lot to go, and it goes back to faith. I like how he's 16, he's talking about just living by faith, and 17, they just shall live by faith at the end of 17. What we're going to have to learn in Romans is the difference between blind faith and obedient faith. And so we talked about it 2 weeks ago. The faith that the Protestant world understands is this faith that if I believe, I'll be saved. It's kind of like the premillennialism thought that Richard brought up this morning. I have 1,000 years to repent. Or if you just have faith alone, you will be saved. The works part separate. But obedient faith requires the works. Because when you look at the obedient faith, and you look at what Paul says a lot, he said it in Acts, and he says it in his other epistles, he brings up the law and how the law was good and how the law had works attached to it. Now we have a new covenant, but that covenant too has the law in it. And within that law entails works that you must do for the Lord. It's works in order to progress what we were originally doing. We were originally to be, the watchers of the animals. We were supposed to take care of the land and everything in the garden. Those were the works, and that too expands out. We're supposed to take care of our brothers. We're supposed to preach His word. We're supposed to do the acts. We're supposed to watch over the widowers. That's why we have deacons. We're supposed to help the elderly. we have these works, and part of the works is the study. The baptism, that's not part of the work. The confession, that's not part of the work. It's not part of the labors. That's what you do to enter, to become able to do the works. And so there's this big separation between what the Protestants see. The Protestants see the baptism and the confession are the works. And stop there. That's hollow faith.
Yeah, I mean, and what they're mentioning, what Paul's mentioning here, you know, people were worshiping things they could see,
Yeah.
not the God that they couldn't see. You know, the evidence of things unseen. You know, faith is evidence of things unseen. Evidence. And Hebrews 3:4, it talks about every house is built by someone, but he built all things as God. And in that section is referring to, you know, Moses, or Christ being better than Moses. You know,
Yeah.
the Jews had faith in Moses, you know, more instead of having a faith in God.
Yeah.
So it's kind of maybe
And even
compare.
Even before Moses, even before the faith in Moses, they had the golden cattle. They had to see it.
You know,
And so,
I've actually never thought about that in comparing the birds that they worshipped to the invisible attributes of verse 20. You know, you look at a bird, if it's just perched on a fence post, yeah, that's one thing. But you see it soaring through the air, there is a part to holding up that bird that is unseen, you know, with aerodynamics and what we understand now.
yeah.
That, you can see the wind through the effects of what it does to those feathers and what it does to that bird as it's flying by. They're seeing the bird, not seeing the one holding it up.
And with the scientific world, they've learned that what helps the bird hold it up too. It's not just, and you can make that kind of like an analogy of a blind faith. There's a mechanic in there that helps it. So before we move on, anyone else have anything that they want to add? Anything that, David, you want to get, we'll just finish it off, just 24 to the end.
Therefore God delivered them over in the desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, so that their bodies were degraded among themselves. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served what has been created instead of the Creator, who is praised forever. Amen. For this reason God delivered them over to disgraceful passions. The women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. The men in the same way also left natural relations with women, and were inflamed in their lust for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the appropriate penalty of their error. And because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a corrupt mind, so that they do what is not right. They are filled with all unrighteousness, evil, greed, and wickedness. They are full of envy, murder, quarrels, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, arrogant, proud, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, senseless, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. Although they know God's just sentence that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them.
How of a mirror it is today that this is.
Oh, yeah.
It is a mirror today. I think we need to start from the beginning on this one. I know I go wiki-wacky all around in these when we look at the sections, but the beginning is just that first part. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness. That's powerful. Because what is that implying?
So you want to believe that? Sure, go ahead.
So I always hear this from those who disbelieve. I hear these two things that never equal up together. If there was a loving God, why would he send me to hell? Also, why would God say that this is wrong? Why would God say that's wrong? He has these rules. And another thing I always hear is, I don't want to be forced to do it. God's not forcing you. And God has these rules. A loving God gives you a choice. I think I mentioned it before. There's a video you can look on YouTube. Christopher Hitchens, who's a prominent journalist, prominent atheist. He was one of the first of the new wave of, I could guess, neo-atheists that actually fought to disprove religion with Dawkins. And there's a
Militant atheists.
Militant atheists. And there's a YouTube clip. It's a very powerful one, you know, and he's asked at an event that he's speaking in, you know, let's say God, the Christian God, put himself in front of you and said, look, I'm here, I'm real. Would you then change and avert? His answer, what was his answer? You don't know?
Probably no.
He said, no, I can never worship a misogynist, racist, bigoted, destructful, warmongering God.
Mm.
He completely missed the point. If God was there, and so it goes back to the beginning of 4. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness. You chose it.
Mhm.
Hell, when we hear hell, we always hear of the imagery of fire and brimstone. That's mentioned sometimes in the Bible. That's mainly from the Greek view of Hades. But also we hear the coldness in the Bible, the gnashing of teeth. Hell is essentially being as far away from God as possible. You are out of sight of God. And that's why it's torture. On this plane, on this world, you are still in the sight of God. You still have a shot. Hell is, you're done. You can't see God no more. You have no more chance. And that's why it's such a torment. And they say, why would a God do this? The better question is, why would you expect a loving God to do that? Why would you expect a loving God to bring you in after you've rejected him?
Yeah. He's giving what you want. I mean, how can a loving God send you to heaven against your will?
Yeah, you chose this. And in the case of Hitchens, and probably several others, they've outright said, I wouldn't want to. You don't, at the end of days, you don't get to take that back unless on this world you change and you follow the fold and you do the work. And it shows too, again, Romans is a big book of faith. You read, we continue going, he gave them up to their passions, he gave them up to their lust, their nature. They had enough faith in themselves to take up the mantle of God instead of following God. That's why Romans is a big book about faith. They took the faith in themselves. They took their own knowledge over God's knowledge. And they separated themselves. And we see the unrighteousness that we even see today. You know, we look down at verse 29, we'll be getting filled with the unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, strife, deceit, evilness, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backstabbers, haters of God, violence, proud, boasters, inventors of evil, disobedient. You know, do these things.
Kaufman brings out that Paul mentioned this 3 times, therefore God also gave them up. Verse 24, 26 and 28, saying there's kind of an emphasis at the end of the chapter. That,
And I want to emphasize, when it's saying God gave them up, he's not saying that they don't have a chance to come back. He's saying, you know, he's saying what all adults say to their children. You're a big boy. You got big boy pants, roll them up and go.
Consequences to your choices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the consequences of your choices. And as we've seen our society grow, we're seeing a lot more adults wanting to shelter away from consequences.
Yeah.
And it's a tough thing because with that mentality breeds this mindset that we are seeing right here at the end of Romans 1. That it's literally a mirror of the day.
I was thinking about Micah 2 in verse 1 and following. It says, woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it's in the power of their hand.
Yeah.
So they'll lay in bed and think of some evil thing that they could do, and then they do it. So whatever comes to their mind, they do it. That's exactly what they're inventors of evil is, verse 30. I mean, that's disgusting, you know, and that's, like you said, that's a mirror for where our society is.
But it goes for the word faith, which is, again, I've said it 500 times probably. I'm just trying to emphasize That is the central thesis of Romans. They have faith in themselves, and they do not have faith in God. I've been on that side before when I was younger. I've had faith in myself over God. And I will tell you, all it leads you to is the easiest way out without thinking of the next step, which is 1,000 harder steps to overcome. Think of the wickedness, the evilness, let's think simply of lying. You lie to get out of one little thing. Now you have to maintain the lie. You have to maintain that lie. You also have to think about who you told that lie to. You got to connect that web.
Yeah.
Let's think of the sexual immorality part. So, sexual immorality, that covers a lot. We'll look at it from the hetero side because it's common. But sexual immorality, so you're young. You want to go, as they say in society, spread drugs. That's what young men do. What do we see in society now? We see young teen pregnancies. We see consequence of that. Some kill, abort, take a potential life. Others have the child, don't tell the father. Others have the child, and this is something I recently saw in a documentary. They had the child, but they don't know who the father is, because they themselves are participating in sexual immorality, the woman. And so they guess at first who the father is. The state starts garnishing their wages. Even after, in the documentary I was watching, even after it was proven that he was not the father, the state was still garnishing the wages. Like Corey said, the sin has consequences. Your actions have consequences. And violence, let's look at violence, being violent or even being proud and boastering. If you're a bragger, no one wants to hang out with you. If you're violent, no one wants to hang out with you because they're scared of you. They have faith in themselves and the things they see, but they don't have faith in God and God's word. And that's what Paul is saying here. When he's given this short sermon of the beginning, basically of Genesis, he's saying, this is what our fathers did. Let's not be like them. Let's learn from our spiritual father. And let's move forward.
Have you seen the interview of Jeffrey Dahmer on YouTube?
I've seen bits of it. So Jeffrey Dahmer, notable serial killer, a lot of people don't realize he's a member of the Church of Christ. He got baptized.
Yeah.
And he actually, from what I understand, fulfilled, he was preaching in the church, or in the jails.
In the jails. But he, when he's interviewed, it was after he became a Christian, he said, I was an atheist, and he said, I was an evolutionist to its ultimate degree. He said, I believe survival of the fittest applied to the human race, and so that's why he literally did what he did. I mean, when he killed people, he just like we would, it's just gruesome what he did, but he saw that there was no difference in mankind than a chicken. No difference in beef.
Yeah, he did the same thing as we see animals do.
Right. He did the same thing we did, but it got worse and worse and worse. He said, I believe we were all from a primordial soup, and it caused him to do the most heinous things we've ever heard of. And we want to look at that person and say, well, he was crazy. Well, he literally took that teaching to its ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
Because if you get rid of God out of man, then morality's gone. And he just absolutely did some of the worst, to the point that he was murdered in the prison because he was worse than all other prisoners, and that guy was like, he doesn't deserve to live. And this guy was there for murder. So
yeah.
They just saw this, well, this guy's worse than anybody. It is just, this is what we're reading. That's where the world is.
But when we look, we need to, Jeffrey Dahmer, we also need to, I think we do a bad job at the church because we're afraid of it. He followed the faith. He will be judged on his actions on Judgment Day.
He was forgiven.
He was forgiven, though. It's hard for us to hear that. It's tough seeing what he did, looking.
Well, if he couldn't be forgiven, Paul couldn't be forgiven.
Paul was a murderer as well. That's what let's say.
If Paul couldn't be forgiven, I can't be forgiven.
Yeah.
So that's.
But Dahmer, I think we look at him. Some of us we mention it. I think Dahmer, in a sense, is a story that sometimes we need to, the ending, not what he did before, but the converting. And while he was in the prisons, what he was doing, the preaching. That's a story that we should talk about. That is essentially what Paul is right now.
Yes.
And so think about it here. You know, when we leave, classes time's up, but I want us to think about that. Paul, you know, he wasn't as ruthless or demonstrative as Dahmer, but they both followed an ideology. That Paul was a Pharisee. He followed the Pharisees' laws. He followed that. Dahmer was an atheist. Followed that, probably like you were saying. But when they heard the word, they had the new covenant. They came into the fold. They changed. And if we look at people like Dahmer who did that and still have disgust, one, how did the people back then, when they heard Paul, we saw in Acts, how did they feel?
Exactly.
But then two, what does that make us? Is that, it makes me, when I think about it, I don't know about all, so it took me a while to kind of swallow that whole.
I think it's probably because it's so recent.
It's so recent, yeah.
I mean, you read about Paul in the Bible, and that was how many years ago, and this is what.
It was back
whenever,
in the 70s, 80s?
I mean, that's pretty recent. So
Yeah. And they'll be judged.
Yeah.
We'll all be judged. You know, you don't get away from judgment. But when you look at somebody and judge them what they did when they weren't a Christian, after they've converted, after they've confessed, repented. That's why we see a lot of this in the Protestant world, just faith only, and manipulating. And as it says here at the end, men taking their own knowledge without God's knowledge. So, anyone else have anything else to add? Nolan, can I get you to listen to something first?
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, for everything that you've given to us. Thank you for letting us come here today and worship in your name. Thank you for the lessons that were brought to us today. Please help all those that are sick or need you in their lives at this time. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Yes.
Amen.